Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you do that and tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free 30-minute consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings for 2025. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter, where I have been publishing my training journal weekly, as well as other topic-based posts. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. Some links and promos for listeners from these brands include a free sample pack of the key flavors of Element by heading to drinklmnt.com/HPO, 20% off your next order of Delta G ketones at deltagketones.com with promo code BITTER20, and Maui Nui Venison at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. Meghan, welcome to the podcast. I think we'll have a fun chat here about your career and Western States being right around. I'm guessing you're probably still in the area.
Yeah.
Waiting for States Day.
Yes, I am. I'm hanging out in Soda Springs, in some cabin in the woods. So
Nice.
But yeah, I was at Broken Arrow for 3 days.
Yeah, I did want to chat to you about that because you were signed up for all three of those races, which that's such a cool setup the way they have that now, where it's the week before Western States.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like different enough from Western States too, where I mean, the world of ultra is so wide ranging that I'm sure there's some crossover, but a lot of it seems like it's like folks that maybe wouldn't necessarily be doing Western States that are focusing on the events that are there, like the Vertical K and things like that. But the timeline is close enough where you kind of get a bunch of the Western States folks and the Broken Arrow folks kind of in the same area at the same time. Or if you're doing one or the other, maybe you show up a week early or stay a week late and just kind of enjoy like two really cool events on the ultra running calendar.
Yeah. And now they have the Trail Con in between. So
that's right.
Just, well, Dylan's doing Trailgater all week long, just constant updating everything. It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's pretty
probably not
electric.
Sleeping for a week.
I'm sure, and voices will be gone.
Yeah. Hopefully you say something for the live broadcast.
Right. Yeah. It was really cool. I've never done a vertical kilometer. I guess we can call it an ascent. And I'm looking at Broken Arrow as a 3-day training camp for myself for TDS that I'm going to do in August. I don't have mountains in Oregon. We have some Cascades, but they're not mountains. Even the Sierras are, just a little sister to the Alps. So having an opportunity to just get out some really steep climbs that I don't have to, recon at all. I just follow the markers and follow the crowd because I am, it is not my strength to do steep stuff. So I had the vertical ascent on Friday, and then 46K on Saturday and a 23K on Sunday. And it's basically the same route over and over. So once you knew it, you could like, yay, now I know it, or like, oh no, now I know it.
Yeah.
What have I done? But it was really a very well-oiled machine. There were, I don't know, 1,000 runners all together maybe, and 6 events. So something for everyone really. And I did the Triple Crown, which was the ascent, the 46K and the 23K. But there was also another kind of Triple Crown called the Iron Face. And the first day was like rock climbing with gear, and that looked pretty cool. They had 11K and 18K, I think. But The runner experience is really good. It's all about, I mean, everything was just so well dialed. Course markings, people out on the course to cheer you on and make sure you were safe. Yeah, I thought it was really well done. The finish line atmosphere is just a big party. You know, you ring a bell when you cross the finish line, and it was very dog friendly. It was like dogs were a big part of the atmosphere in Olympic Valley. It was really cool. But yeah, also we had a lot of weather. I don't know if you heard about this, but
I saw that. Yeah. Was that for
yeah,
the 46K that was the 23?
it was for the 46. So the good news is the people who were in contention for like US team, um, and any elites fast people definitely got the 46K done. The rest of
Okay.
us got stopped at various places depending on where we were when this black cloud rolled in. It was really weird. It started snowing in these tiniest little flakes. I didn't know. I thought, is that ash? Because the sun was still shining. I couldn't figure it
Yeah.
out. And I went another, I don't know, quarter mile, and there was a race manager said, "Yep, y'all got to get in the ski hut and wait." And I was like the 10th person in there. By the time everyone got off, there were 92 of us in this little ski hut,
Oh, wow.
the size of a living room.
All
Um,
smelling great, I'm sure too.
yeah, I don't know. It wasn't bad because it wasn't like what sweaty hot out. So,
That's good.
but it was, I think, a couple hours before they called the race, and then another hour before they figured out how we were gonna get down. And then yesterday was just perfect, just beautiful. So there were only like, I think, only 8 women in the Triple Crown who finished on day 2. So that limited that bit. Um, but and the day before on Friday there was high wind advisory, so they shortened the vertical ascent to just over 2 miles and 1,800 feet of gain because it was, I guess, 70 mile an hour winds up high.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they kept everyone safe. They had their plan and they executed it really well. And yeah, it was really good.
That's cool. Yeah, it looks like a fun event. I think the report I saw with the 46K was, oh, there's been lightning strike within like 5 miles of the course, so they were
It
pretty strict about getting you guys out of the out of the way
that
of that
was
potential.
that was real. Actually, when we were in that hut, the lightning and thunder struck at the same time. So it was like, oh,
Oh, really?
yeah, we would have been somebody up a little higher. Put you definitely could have gotten zapped, but it was like, okay, glad we're inside. It was only the
That's where
once,
you're
but yeah,
like, all right, I agree with this decision now.
I did anyway. I'm being a race director. I'm never gonna ever argue with someone telling me what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you've probably heard it all.
I've heard a few.
All the complaints and all the
Hmm.
praise and everything in between.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Awesome. So you're doing TDS is what you're kind of targeting this year?
Yes, I am, and it's got with 90 miles and 30,000 feet of vert, and it's Alps. It's different, you know. It's I'll
Hmm.
get to be out there for 3 weeks before the race, so I can just be a little more familiar with the type of terrain. I've done UTMB and I finished, but I would call it a miserable performance because I hadn't really trained properly for it. I've always just trained for Western States, and it's just so different.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're a fun person to talk to about just ultra running in general because you've been in the sport for a while and you haven't just, I mean, you're definitely a fixture around Western states, and that was obviously a big focus of yours as a competitive athlete and just as I'm sure someone who just loves the event itself. But you've also just done such a diverse range of different things, from the flat runnable stuff, world championship type stuff, mountain stuff, and now you engage with the sport in ways outside of just running too, with um, working with USATF and things like that as a coach. So there's really a limitless number of directions we could go in terms of what you could probably share with us today. Um, but yeah, I think one of the topics that's probably gonna be fun to chat with you about a little bit is just maybe your experience with Western states and just kind of the growth of that event, kind of things that have changed from when you were racing it and just kind of get your take on some of that stuff. So I think it might be fun to dive into that if you don't mind.
Sure, I'd love to talk about Western states. Like, where would I begin?
Right. What was the first year you did Western States?
2006, and I got in the lottery. Like, I was the fourth draw, but the lottery had 600 people in it, so it was
Yeah.
pretty easy. Um, and I mean, gosh, we have learned so much in what's it? Almost it's 19 years ago as a sport. It's just incredible. And the mistakes you make in your first race, and now I don't think anyone would make the mistakes I made in that first year. Um, just like I didn't take in salt, and I got all puffy and blistered and nauseous and all the things. And I don't know that we even said hyponatremia yet. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just kind of miserable. And the race was still small, and I still got a top 10 with a, pretty average, would be considered a fairly average time these days. That, so I was lucky, you know, to come back and learned a lot each year, come back, make more mistakes. And hopefully, and I'm sure actually people have learned from our mistakes. And it's getting to a point now where these top athletes, it's like they're just tightening the screws. Like, what do I have
Hmm.
left that I can actually improve on? It might be 5 seconds in an aid station. I don't know. But anyway, I got kind of ahead of myself there.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, that's one of the topics I kind of want to talk to you about just in general too, is just like what are like, the Western States is such a good way to look at this because it's a big enough spotlight on that event where the incentive to do it right is just going to be a little bit higher. And then
Yeah,
it's got the competitive pressure where now you have people getting a lot of resources available to them to solve some of these problems
yeah.
that you were essentially doing trial and error to figure out back in '06 when you first did it. I think '06 was one of the really hot years too, wasn't it?
It was. It's one of those funny statements. Like, most years are really hot, but that
Right, right,
was,
yeah,
I think it's the maybe now the second hottest since it started. So yeah, that was bonus. I mean, I
yeah,
went in like, well, I handle heat just fine. I like heat, but it was just naive.
right.
Just naive, yeah. Um,
Now it's about how do you handle all the different protocols that can keep you from getting too hot.
right, right. Where am I going to put my ice, and how much am I going to carry? And yes, how much salt am I going to put in between these two aid stations? It's pretty
Hmm.
insane. That's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to manage if you really want to be, have the best performance. It's a lot of problem solving and staying on top of everything that comes your way.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think with like between, I mean, I guess from '06 till today, we're getting close to 20 years, 20 years of just like growth and evolution within the sport too, where, there's like sodium, there's nutrition, there's gear. I mean, something I found it kind of funny. I think this was maybe last year. There was some topic we were online was being chatted about just like kind of like what it was like to run a race like Western States before the more modern era. And, there's just so many different things that you wouldn't think of,
hmm
even down to like a headlamp
hmm
where, okay, like if you're going to be in the dark at all, then you're going to need some light at a certain point. It's like we have way better lighting systems now where like there was a time when you literally had like a D cell battery flashlight that you'd
right,
carry
right.
to light the path in front of you. Yeah, and then just like the performance nutrition has gone towards like I mean, I think you can still go a long way with a cup of Coca-Cola probably, but I mean, you do have a lot better like options to maximize like your fuel intake and fluid balances and then we get into the world of tech like super shoes and things like that. To whatever degree they make a big impact on the trails is probably somewhat debatable at least, but I mean, shoe tech in general, I'm sure is
Mm,
much better than it was 20 years ago. So
yeah,
we do kind of have these like measurements of like progress where you've got the competitive pressure, which I'm sure draws out faster times in general, but then we also have better equipment, better nutrition, and all these sort of things that And even in the areas where we had decent equipment, just like the utilization of them properly,
Hmm.
like there was electrolytes and stuff back in '06, but there was just way less information about how to actually engage with them.
Right.
Um, I actually remember when I did Western States was my first 100 miler in 2012, and that was back when they still weighed you at the aid stations to make sure
Right.
you didn't lose too much. So like, I mean, we worked with what you had at the time. That seemed
Right.
like it made sense, and now they realize, maybe that's not the best measurement to kind of assess whether
Right.
someone's coherent or not.
Yeah. 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 Right. I mean, you could be kind of out of it and not dehydrated. So it's like,
Hmm.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, I remember, I think I actually like ended up arriving at the finish line the same weight as my weigh-in, which was maybe a little bit more than I needed in hindsight, because you probably can tolerate a little bit of dehydration or
Yeah.
fluid loss versus what I was probably chasing that day. Although 2012 was the cold year,
That's
so
right. Yes.
I probably didn't have as much fluid loss as what you would typically have at that event.
Yeah. I remember arguing with a aid station captain at one of the aid stations about my weight. It was 2010, and I was actually in second place at ALT, and um I just gotten into second place, so I was like wanting to go, and
Right. Anxious. Yeah.
yeah, and I got on the scale, and I can't remember if I was up or down. Yeah, one or the other. And it's like, actually, I was kind of rude to the aid station captain. I'm like, I feel fine. I just came in second place now. I need to go. And well, I don't, please just let me go. And I don't know. I seemed pretty, with it. He let me go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a good thing to get rid of that because I mean, we're all just one poop and pee away from being up or,
Right.
below or above. And it's, or what if you just ate a bunch? And the way it would, you know, encourage people to do things to trick the
Hmm.
scale, right? It's like either drink a whole bunch before you get in, or go to the bathroom before you get in, or take this article of clothing, all these things that
Hmm.
just added stress that was not really beneficial.
Just a quick reminder that Currents is a product I use pre workout and during events to help with blood flow, recovery, and fat oxidation. Check out currenzusa.com. That's CURRENZUSA.com to see the 40 plus studies they have and use promo code BITTER20DEAL for 20% off your first purchase. Full description of how I use Currents at the end of the episode. How many times have you done Western States now?
I have 13 finishes. Um, 12 of them were sub 24. 10 of them were top 10. And the last one I did was on the um, Silver Legend ticket. I was awarded over 60 years old, and I I would have liked to have broken 24, but it was post COVID, post moving back to Oregon, and uh, I just didn't do the proper training. Just sort
Hmm.
of, it was hard. I don't know. I think it was hard for a lot of people after COVID to kind of get back into the groove. I remember like, oh, I can sign up for races now? Huh. That's
Yeah.
like, hmm. So I would like another shot at in my 60s to see if I can get a sub 24. I think that'd be cool. Um, but yeah, and when I lived down here, I lived here for 8 years in Cool, and call it my 8 years of Western States training camp. Just loved being down here and just being out on the trails and just knowing the course so well. It's a pretty um, perfect place to live if you want to do well at this race.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely get all sorts of course recon and really prep yourself for some of those tricky spots. And I always think of Western States as kind of an interesting course because when you get into the world of like trail running, there's more like scenic courses out there where it's like, okay, this is just a beautiful course that's like I can't do this anywhere else. I have to be here to really
Mhm.
experience this. But like it's pretty unique, I think, when you have a race like Western States where the skill sets required for the different sections of it are pretty drastically different, where like the
Hmm.
skill set that's going to be good in the high country is going to be different than than some of the skill sets that you need, or the developments that you need for being in the canyons when it's really hot. Where,
100%.
you know, I always get a kick out when they have like the fire and ice years, where it's like there's snow up in the high country and it's
Hmm.
blazing hot in the canyons. Like you can experience like both those ends of the spectrum within a few hours of one another.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and then you get to Forest Hill and it's like a lot more runnable there. And so
Yeah.
it's like, from a just like, for someone who's just interested in just kind of like training methods and like building like a running tolerance, I guess, that's going to be more specific to the task at hand, it's really hard to really pin down where you want to kind of do those things for a course like Western States, because
Right.
there's a little give and take there.
Yeah. It's like,
um
yeah, how do you um, sort of accentuate the things that you're really good at, but you don't want to completely neglect. You want to train the stuff that's your weaknesses, but you don't want to put too much in that, because how much of the race are you going to use those weak spots? Um,
mhm.
Honestly, you really need to be able to run. You really need to be able to run at mile um, yeah, 60 when you get to Forest Hill. You want to be able to run the rest of the way. I've never really nailed that. You know? um, so, um, but that's where the running starts, is Forest Hill.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I find that really interesting too, because there's sort of like, to get to your point with like the strengths and weaknesses, it's like, let's say like your weakness is the canyons and your strength is the runnable stuff. It's like, yeah, you would think like, okay, I just got to get to Forest Hill where my strengths can come alive. But if your weaknesses on the climbs, in a sense, in the canyons, or your tolerance to heat are such that you arrive at Forest Hill, like anyone knows, like you can always take a skill set away. You can always make a strength a weakness
Yeah.
if you put yourself in the right position or back
Right.
yourself into the corner enough.
Yeah.
And I always wonder about that with Western States. It's like, how much of an impact could it be to like not be ready enough for those first two sections,
Yeah.
so that you're there ready to lean on your strength, and where that balance is. And
Yeah.
my thought is usually like, if you have a weakness, you're probably better off trying to work that up a little bit earlier on in the training,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that
Right.
when you get later in the training, you're able to like really lean into some of your strengths a little bit more. I'd be
Yep.
curious if like, how your did your view change with that over the years that you did it, or was that an evolution at all, or?
I don't think I got too particular. I'm I'm decent at most of it. I think that um, one of the most important skill sets really is the downhill running, because you can really
Mhm.
wreck your race if you've not got quads that handle those descents into the canyons. I think even more than the heat of the canyons, it's that descending and all that eccentric contracting, and that's where I think you can really trash your legs and get in a lot of trouble. And then you get to Forest Hill and it's like, guess I'm going for a walk, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, and it's not, I think it'd be hard to do if you live where it's flat. Figuring out how you're going to train for downhill when you live where it's flat can be, I'm sure, really hard. It might involve going up and down stairs and, tall buildings or something like that with a weighted vest, but it
Mhm.
can be done. And I think I would say that might be the most important thing to train for Western states is the downhill.
Yeah. No, I think I would agree. I mean, when I did it, I was coming from Wisconsin, so I had that scenario where I had a lot of flat running in my back pocket, but I had very little experience to doing long continuous downhill running and things like that. And I went out like just early enough where I got on like 70 miles of the course, but it
Hmm.
was a pretty tight, like it was like basically the weekend before.
Wow.
So it was, yeah, I was sort of in this spot where it was like, what's the risk reward here? Because I mean, ideally, I probably would have done that maybe 2 weeks or even 3 weeks prior.
Hmm.
But, getting out there, I had to follow the timeline I had available to. So I was like, well, I think I probably improve upon my finishing time if I'm able to get some experience on the course, versus going in completely blind and then also assuming that I'm going to be able to tolerate the downhill
Yeah.
side of the stuff. So, um, And skeletal muscle stuff is maybe a little. I'd be interested with your thoughts on this too, because I think when I first started ultra running, we followed like maybe a little more of a traditional taper, whereas I think we're probably seeing more now. We're able to maybe keep a longer session, and you probably don't want to be doing 70 miles of the trail necessarily the weekend prior,
Mhm.
but uh, to some degree, I think we're seeing more people do a little bit, they're stretching out their long run maybe a little bit
Mhm.
further. And as long as they're padding that with a little more rest and recovery in those final weeks, it's maybe like kind of a similar approach to what you would see with other tapers, where you don't want to remove the aspect that's most important, but you also want to make sure you're giving your body enough
Mhm.
extra recovery so that you're not going in fatigue the way you would be after like a training block.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I think that's true. The gains made by a taper might be only 2 or 3% in performance, which at the pointy end of the stick does matter.
mhm,
Um, so that's, I'm sure, very nuanced, and it totally depends on the athlete. Um, but the further away you get from those high performances, the benefit of a big taper is probably not that great. So, as much as you can keep, stressing and recovering, I think it's gonna, keeping that volume up is probably gonna help you get a finish.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you get too far away from it too, then you also start running into some issues potentially with like, oh, I haven't like eccentrically loaded my quads in a
Yes.
couple of weeks, and then
Yep.
you're probably gonna
Yeah. I've seen that
taper that a
happen.
little bit.
I've seen that
Hmm.
happen where, someone like maybe 4 weeks out doesn't hadn't done any more downhill running, and they pay for it on race day. I used to do a workout with Craig Thornley and our buddies in Eugene when we all lived in Oregon. Um, it's a out and back trail called Rooster Rock, and we get, what is it, like 4,000 feet in 11 miles. And we did it for the downhill, and we do it
Hmm.
2 weeks out from Western States. And we were all sore for, 3, 4, 5 days afterward. But it was like that last little bit of spicing up the
Hmm.
quads, and then our quads would be solid for Western States. Yeah. I've been doing that one now for
You're back out there.
I am. And what my dream was always to, I want to do Rooster Rock one day and not be sore, and I have achieved that because I've been going
Hmm.
out every week to do it,
Yeah.
and I'm not sore from doing Broken Arrow. So I'm pretty tickled about
Awesome.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're a good spot then. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, ideally you can kind of micro stress your way up and you don't have to be like too destroyed. I think people sometimes see that, I think, with the training camp with Western States,
Hmm.
where you can get on a huge chunk of the course and a lot of the downhill side of it. And then, you kind of come to a realization sometimes, I think, after that weekend of like, oh, you know what? There's maybe some work to be done on the downhill running yet. And
Yeah.
you kind of have a few more opportunities after that to like, if you really, assuming you live in an area where you have access to
Hmm.
that, where if it's looking a little bit iffy, you can get a few more stimuluses in and catch that up. But
Yeah.
to the original point, I think you're right about that. I think that's a pretty big component to Western States, is how your quads kind of hold up through those sections
Yeah.
and things like that. Um, do you I know you coach and stuff, like, so I'm guessing you've worked with people doing Western States that are from more flat areas. Is there a strategy that you like to use to kind of help at least minimize some of the potential downsides of having to run downhill at the course and not necessarily be able to do that in their training?
Yeah. I haven't really had too many, if any, flatlanders. I don't think I've coached any flatlanders. Some have more just rolling hills, and um, I think I've encouraged them to, do some downhill stuff with a weighted vest because they have short stints. I know there are some treadmills that will go do
Yeah,
descending on. I mean, as again, it's a chunk of change. If you're gonna, kind of to Western States, I'm gonna buy this big fancy treadmill so I can run downhill.
right.
It's kind of hard. Um, but I would encourage people, if I had someone that was flatlander, to find a tall staircase, like a and a commercial building, if you can go in and do some repeats downstairs with a weighted vest, take the elevator back up, or do both. But I would encourage them to do anything they could to get those eccentrics fired up on a continuous basis.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what Nicole actually did when she was living in Dallas and she was
Hmm.
in Western states. She would go to the stairwells and run up. I don't think she went as far as a weighted vest, but she definitely went down or used that as an option. It's always interesting to me too, because it's like there's the training aspect of it, and I also think there's going to be some variance from one individual to the next, and it's probably like the gait to some degree where Nicole and I can kind of do similar training inputs, and like her tolerability of downhill running is like noticeably better than mine.
Is it?
So like we would go, well, yeah, we'll go and we'll do a similar route, and like she won't be any worse for the wear the next day, and I'll be like, oh, I definitely feel that in my quads, and
Uh-huh.
um,
Yeah. That's a good
it's
point
kind
though.
of
I
an
mean, it's
interest.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting stuff with that endpoint, but yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about like maybe nutrition too.
Hmm.
Over the years that you did it, was there a lot of evolution in kind of how people were fueling Western states from? So I should have asked you this first. Like, what was the last year you did Western states, or the most
Uh,
recent, I should say?
2022. So 3 years
Okay,
ago.
so
Yeah.
pretty recent. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what were you eating back in '06 versus what were you eating in 2022?
In '06, I remember distinctly making a bunch of avocado and cheese sandwiches the night before the race for my crew to give to me. And I can't tell you how many of them I threw away. Just like I felt so like guilty about here's my crew handing me these sandwiches and I'm like, thank you. And I stuff them in my
Yeah.
bag and like throw them away at the next aid station because I couldn't eat them. Um, I in that race, I drank too much water and um, too little of anything else until I got sorted at about halfway through the race when someone said, "You need to take some salt in," and gave me some salty, salty, salty broth. And that turned things around for me. And I honestly can't remember like what it might have been the drink Accelerate. Do you remember that one?
Okay.
I
Yep.
think that was one of them. I don't know what the race was providing that back then. I don't think GU existed in 2006. I'm not sure when they, as a company, when they came around, and they've been a sponsor for the race for years. So, um, yeah, I've I've done a lot of different things, but mostly I've done sports nutrition in the form of a gel and or the electrolyte drink. I have learned over and over again. I'm just not one to eat solid foods while racing. It's just, I will fail at getting enough calories in because I just don't want to chew food. It just sits in my mouth.
Hmm.
And as much as it's a good practice to, have food in your hand and water in your bottle, I will just get way behind. So I get a lot of my calories in the liquid form. And maybe because I'm generally not a very hot runner, I don't sweat very much, that tends to work for me. Um,
Hmm.
there are times where I will go with a bottle with electrolyte and carbohydrate in it and a bottle of just water if it's particularly hot, because you do get that, you just need some water sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I've just sort of gone with the flow of whatever products they have at aid stations. I don't have a queasy stomach pretty much. Um, and yeah, maybe I fail at getting enough nutrition in, but at least I don't throw up and I make it to the finish line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is that balance too. I think, like, I mean, we see like the recommendations of like what you should be eating during a 100-miler race between solids and liquids and things like that. And, they're usually recommending that you have some variance there. But,
Hmm.
that might just be a good starting point for people to play around with. But I also think there's people like yourself where it's just like, hey, I can tolerate a decent amount of liquid gel type stuff, and I don't tolerate a lot of solid stuff, so I need to at the
Yeah.
very least skew my ratios heavily towards
Hmm.
the more sports product type things. Whereas, you might have someone else who's maybe on the opposite side of that spectrum and they're going to do a little more solids.
Hmm.
um I also think it's like it's a difference between, when we get to like the range of whoever's finishing in the front versus in the
Yeah,
back, you almost have two different events at that point from an intensity
yeah,
standpoint, uh, where you take me running as hard as I can for 14 hours versus me running and probably walking to some degree as fast as I can for 30 hours, and I'm going to eat differently.
yeah,
And it's so I think there's probably some of that too, where
100%.
when you were in your peak finishing in the top 10 and things like that, you're moving quick enough where
Hmm.
it may just be that liquids and gels were
Yeah.
something that needed to be the thing to take in to get what you needed. Just a quick reminder that Element Electrolyte is my go-to electrolyte source. They are offering a free sample pack with purchase for all HPO listeners at drinklmnt.com/HPO. They also just launched a new flavor, lemonade. Check it out risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Also, check out my full description of how I use Element at the end of the episode.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. Um, and over time, we're all pretty darn good at fat metabolism. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, honestly, staying hydrated is so important. And it's a shame that so many people who DNF do it because of, stomach issues, GI issues, throwing up, and we have the ability to keep moving forward for a long time just by our fat metabolism. Um, but we can get ourselves in a whole lot of trouble if we're dehydrated. So
Mm-hmm.
just I rely on that if I get behind or if I don't feel well, it's like, well, I can go a long way and I'll slow down and that's okay as long as I don't get sick, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I think it's just important to kind of keep grounded and keep moving forward and not get panicked about, oh my God, I only got in, 90 grams of carbs that last, hour.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's nice to have a range and have a plan. But during the race, if you want to finish, keep your mind open. And I think it's okay to try something new on race day when it comes to nutrition because your plan just might fall apart, but
Yeah.
hopefully that's not a reason to quit, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you hit on some great points. I think it's yeah, there's a value in trying to get enough food in, but at what cost? So like I had Pam Smith on a couple of years ago and we were talking about this and she said like, she just got good at paying attention to kind of how her body was processing the inputs where
Hmm.
some days she was taking in like the top end of what she thought she could tolerate and it was going down smooth and she just kept doing it. And then there were days where, for whatever reason, maybe it was a little warmer or her stomach was a little upset and
Hmm.
she'd start to feel it maybe bottlenecking a little bit. And that was her sign, okay, I'm not going to force more on top of that because it's just not going to end well.
Right.
And it would settle down eventually and then she could kind of resume.
Yeah.
And you just do the best you can within what your body's giving you from that. And yeah, avoiding the situation where you're, puking on the side of the trail nonstop or
Right.
rushing to the bathroom like every couple miles.
Yeah.
You're going to be moving a little bit quicker, just burning fat in a lot of cases for a while if you have to kind of keep that scenario off the table.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um I think you're right about that. And you did say something too that I find really interesting because we put a lot of focus. I would think we were putting a lot more focus on hydration now than we maybe had originally. But we also continue to put a ton of emphasis on the nutrition, which is good. But I think to some degree, we should always be thinking hydration first with these things because the way I describe it is like if you do a race like Western States, you're probably gonna finish at least slightly dehydrated.
Hmm.
So no matter how good of a job you do, just with processing limits and things
Yeah.
like that, and I'm sure there's gonna be some ranges where people with higher sweat loss and stuff like that might have a harder time doing that, where someone really low might be able to actually like execute like perfect hydration.
Yeah.
But most people are going to be probably slightly under what they could probably, or they're going to be slightly dehydrated on their best case scenario. So if we're taking a scenario where like perfection isn't even really on the table, you really need to minimize the mistakes you make within that one.
Hmm.
And when you just look at the downstream effects of dehydration, it's sort of like as a force multiplier for negatives on other things too, where you get dehydrated. Now all of a sudden your nutrition isn't going down as well as it.
Right.
So like I always wonder when people say, "Oh, I was doing this fueling strategy, it's working great," and then all of a sudden it just stopped working. I don't know what. I didn't change anything. So well, maybe you got dehydrated, and what was working when you were hydrated just doesn't work for you when you're dehydrated.
Yeah.
And so I usually try to lead with hydration, where it's like you could probably get away with less than you think you can if you absolutely have to. It might not be perfect, it might not be your best day ever, but it's
Yeah.
going to be better than DNFing because you can't keep anything down. And yeah, I think you're right. Hydration plays a huge role there.
Right. Right. And then there's the fine line of over drinking and being sure that you're
Hmm.
not drinking a lot of plain water, because that leads to really serious problems too.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, if people just try to be educated as much as they can about symptoms to watch out for, and staying hydrated but not overhydrated, keeping up your electrolytes, and just kind of get out of your head sometimes. I mean, I feel like the protocols can be so elaborate and intense, and it's just like, just calm the fuck down. just
Yeah.
just just eat and drink and move and enjoy the
Hmm.
scenery, but try not to get yourself too wrapped up in a frenzy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like the recommendation of nibble and sipping because it's like
Yeah.
if you're thinking about just doing that
Hmm.
and you're kind of consistent with it, you're going to probably get pretty close to landing where you need to.
Yep.
And by doing that, you're probably going to be less likely to invite something that's like unwelcoming by eating too much and then having a stomach ache, or
Right.
going a long period of time without eating and then feeling you have to eat a lot and then have that sort of like contrasting negatives start interacting with one another. So yeah, but there's something else you said that I wanted to. Oh, yeah, for like for hydration stuff like, yeah, I think you can, like what I'll usually have people do. I'd be curious if you do anything similar to this with hot weather races. Is I'll have them do like just do like a fluid loss test where they run for an hour, weigh themselves before and after.
Hmm.
And ideally, if we can capture like one of those in like cooler temps, moderate temps, and hot temps, we can sort of get at least a ballpark figure
Hmm.
of where their fluid loss rates are across like different weather ranges. And then we can at least start kind of getting a plan put together of like, well,
Hmm.
what should you expect to maybe need to bring from one aid station to the next? Whether you actually end up taking in all of that or not
Hmm.
can be a little bit more decision making on the day based on how you're feeling and how your body's responding. But at least we kind of have some planning so that you don't feel like you're totally off in no man's land with no idea what to do, but you're also not so strict about it that you feel like, oh, if I got 16 ounces instead of 20 ounces, my race is over, which is
Yeah.
probably not going to be the case.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the harder one
Yeah.
I think though, yeah, the harder one I think is sometimes the electrolyte loss side of it because that's such a wide range from one
Hmm.
person to the next. And
Yeah.
other than getting it tested, I mean, you can go by population level averages of around like I think it's 950 milligrams per liter of lost sweat. But then you get some people way on the low end that are maybe 200 to 300 milligrams. Then you get people that are way on the high end that are 2+ grams. And like I'm curious if you have anything that you do with your clients and people you talk to that are interested about like looking for symptoms that they see maybe in training that would suggest whether they're you know being a little too light on their electrolytes or too heavy on their electrolytes.
I do have one athlete who um, I'm working with right now about that, because he's had some um, bad experiences in heat. So that was one thing that I just recommended, is we should, if you can't get a fancy, sweat test, then at least let's do the way before and way after, and how much did consume, and see if we can't dial that down for him. All my other athletes seem to be pretty well regulated. It hasn't been an issue yet, but it is amazing the tools that are available to test these
Hmm.
things. Go to the sweat lab or the salt lab or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, it is cool, and it's good to have options for more information. Um, and at the same time, still try to figure out a little bit on your own. Not get too reliant on technology all the time.
Hmm.
Um, if you feel a certain way, well, let's try some things and um, see what happens. Um, but Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who's coming to Western States. He's one of the elder statesmen. Ed Wilson, he's 70. He's one of, there's six, I think there's five 70-year-olds and an 80-year-old in
Wow.
Western States this year. But Ed Wilson is 70, and he was the first person I paced at Western States, and that was 2005, and that was my introduction to the race. Well, he got back in this year, and it's been 20 years since he's run it. And he is a very heavy sweater and loses a lot of salt. So he has been going to a sweat lab at U of O and getting his sweat rate and rate, um, salt loss rates dialed down to. So I'll be anxious to see how
Yeah.
well that plays out for him. Because yeah, he's very salty sweater, and he's 70 years old. So a
Hmm.
couple strikes against you when you're trying to
Yeah.
run 100
Yeah.
miles. Um, yeah, I think it's a cool thing to be able to try to figure out. I don't know how. Do you know how much those cost to go to a lab and get a?
That's a good question. I know, like, I had Andy Blow on the podcast a couple of years ago, and he, like, along with Precision Nutrition, which has gotten pretty popular, they kind of got their foundation in that, where they have these. It's like a little suitcase looking device almost, where you pop it open and it's got like all the machinery required, and they just put this little thing on your, I think it's on your forearm, and then it just draws, like, it just needs a tiny amount of sweat because it's just looking for the,
Okay.
the ratio essentially. And then they put it in there in like 30, less than 30 minutes. You've got like a report of just like what your electrolyte losses are.
Uh-huh.
So I had like, and it's gotten popular enough where they've got people that I think you can like apply to become a tester, because it's not anything like super complicated. You don't
Oh,
have to have
okay.
like a medical degree or anything like that. So then I think you can actually go on there and apply and get it, go through the protocol and then purchase your little testing kit. And then I've seen people do that at like specialty shop running stores, where they'll be doing like a group run, and then they'll
Oh,
like set up there and they can test people. And I wish I remembered what they were charging. I think it's just like, I think it's like a few $100. I think it's like
okay.
300-400 bucks maybe. It might be cheaper than that. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you could also probably, I bet a lot of universities have that service that you
Mm-hmm.
could do, where I think people don't always think of universities as options. But like, if you want to get like a metabolic cart test done, you can oftentimes go to
Mm-hmm.
universities, and so you've got one nearby. And then you can ask about the sweat test, because it sounds like Ed was going to U of O, so they
Mm-hmm.
clearly got the setup for it. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it is one of those things where I usually tell people, just first check Precision's website, because they've got like a
Okay.
cal or like a map on there of where all their different
Okay.
testing people are. Because what I found with some coaching clients who are really interested in too is like, that's a business for those people, so they're willing to travel if if they can like get some tests or
Okay.
deliver some tests. So it might even be just like, hey, if there's someone like within maybe a couple hours of where you live, go chat with your specialty shop and say, hey, maybe we should see if this guy was willing to come in and offer this at one of our group runs. And then if they
That'd be
can get
cool.
a handful of people to sign up, might be worth their time.
Yeah.
Um, there's a bunch of other options now too, or I think it's Nix does like a wearable one where you wear it and it can tell you. And I know the first generation of those had some like, it was a little like, is maybe not quite as accurate as you'd really want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that, I mean, they're at least on their second generation now, and maybe further. So it's possible that has gotten a little more accurate than it originally was. So I think we're getting closer to kind of even like removing some of that friction of having to find someone with a testing kit, and
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
order it and do it yourself, and and
That's
get
so
those
cool.
answers. But
I mean, it's like
mhm,
the continuous glucose monitoring,
yep,
the lactate threshold
yeah,
testing strips, and it's like, wow, just
hmm,
like little biology experiments out.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wonder like, when are we going to get the one you just plug onto your forearm or wherever, and then it tells you like, yeah, like your lactate, your sodium loss,
Yeah.
your hydration level, your fat ox, like
Yeah.
everything you could imagine wanting to know, in the just eliminate all the decision making. I don't
That-
so some of that feels almost less fun to me though too. It's like,
right.
I love data and I love optimization and stuff like that, or I probably wouldn't have found myself on 400-meter tracks running running 100
Right.
milers. But to some degree, I also really like the just the unknown that we sometimes have too, and and this is probably an interesting topic with you too, just because you've probably seen a lot of this since your start of your ultra career to today. Is just, you know, when I first did ultras, it was like there was just a ton of just asking people what they did.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah,
And now there's still
crowdsourcing.
that element.
Yeah.
I think that always is probably lingering around to some degree because people get excited about that sort of a process. But we also do know a lot more now. So, but I think a lot of the stuff we know also is like we're extrapolating pretty far forward when we get into these 100-mile races in Western states.
Hmm.
It's like with some things, it's like, well, how does our fat ox and carbohydrate fat metabolism shift by hour 15 versus what we see in a lab over like the a single treadmill test and things like that, and how does that drive your needs and fueling or change and things like that. So it's kind of to your point earlier, like it's probably good to have some information so you're not just throwing things up against the wall
Hmm.
all day long, but you're also aware that, hey, if this isn't working, I can to some degree trust my intuition and not keep
Right,
hammering away at something
right.
that's broken.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage people to um, keep their intuition in shape, to
Hmm.
not ignore what they're feeling based upon what their watch is telling them.
Hmm.
It's easy to do. If it's really hot out, your heart rate's going to be high because it's hot and you're trying to dissipate heat. Doesn't mean that you're working, that you should
Hmm.
be, you know, working that hard. It's come up because it's hot. So you don't need to try to push a pace because, well, my heart rate's this. I mean, I should be going, 8-minute pace, not 10-minute pace. What's wrong? I need to work harder. It's like that's where you get in trouble with that kind of information. You need to think of your own, talk to yourself a little bit. Does this make sense? And how do I feel? And only you know.
Hmm.
So yeah.
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 Yeah. It gets interesting. I mean, I think there's also like some signs that you can kind of look for too when someone is having issues too, where I've had a few coaching clients in the past where like, well, we'll start with the recommendations for electrolyte needs based on your sweat loss totals from like just doing those tests of weighing themselves
Mhm.
before and after. And then, we find that, that was maybe a little low for them. And there's usually some reason to believe that, where like they're the type of person where when they finish a run, they've got like white salt streaks on their
Yeah.
clothing versus the person who never has that. It's like, you could be two ends of the spectrum there with that experience. Or another one I really like sometimes too, if we suspect that you're not getting enough electrolytes, is after like a run that's a little bit longer in the heat, it's like, if you sit down and stand up, do you feel like you get a little sense of lightheadedness, or
Uh-huh.
maybe see some stars for a brief period of time, or just feel like your response is a little slow versus, or just like another one that I find interesting. And to some degree, it's like it could just be dehydration in general too. So you got to make sure you're
Right.
you're checking that box first. But like you finish a run, like what I find is like if I neglect electrolytes and I do a long enough run in the heat, it's like by the end of the day before if then where I start feeling kind of back to normal, where in most
Hmm.
cases I should be able to tolerate a pretty long run in the first half of the day and you know get some good food in and can continue to drink, and I shouldn't feel like I'm not able to kind of go about my normal day without
Right.
a bunch of trouble. So when I start noticing things like that, where it's just like, oh yeah, I'm working noticeably more difficult just to do basic tasks
Yeah.
after these sessions, then I think those are usually some signs of like, okay, maybe we need to optimize a little bit more with things like electrolytes or fuel to some
Fuel
degree
in general
too.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick reminder that Delta G Ketones is my go-to exogenous ketone source. You can get 20% off at deltagketones.com when you use promo code BITTER20. Check out my full description of how I use Delta G Ketones at the end of the episode.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Teaching people to use the information that they get, that's like real numbers, but how do you feel under those numbers? And so you can, I don't know, reverse engineer it
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. So
Yeah.
you not
Mm-hmm.
always have to have data in front of you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Have you had a lot of your coaching clients or just in general people getting curious about hitting like really high amounts of carbohydrates during races. I know that's just a topic in the ultra running, well, in the endurance space in general, where I always get excited about these things to some degree, for
Hmm.
better or worse, where it's like, all right, we've got these recommendations, and then but these Tour de France athletes are doing this much more, or
Yeah, but they're not pounding the pavement. They're not jostling their
right,
bellies.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, there was a paper came out, is it ISSN, position paper on nutrition in female athletes.
Hmm.
And Stacy Sims was the head author, but there's a list of authors because it was a, metadata analysis really. Um, it's interesting that in general, women are not processing substantially more than 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Um, so I kind of keep that in mind if an athlete's, wanting to push that. But I do have an athlete who just on her own is like, she's pushing 90 grams per hour and she's succeeding with it just fine. So I'm not going to tell her not to
Hmm.
do that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, but I do think that if 60 grams works, why put 90 in?
Right, yeah.
Does 90 going to work better than 60? I don't know. But if 60 is working and you're feeling good, I don't think that just because it's an option or people are doing it, we're going to
Hmm.
crowdsource a bunch. Um, it's one of those, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Um,
Yeah.
so again, all these trends as they happen, people get very excited and get on the bandwagon and they all want to try it. Um, and there's some things I'm an early adopter on and some things I'm more of a late adopter on. And
Yeah.
so I kind of like to wait and see a little bit
Hmm.
where it's going.
Yeah.
As long as
Especially
people,
before you start telling all your coaching clients to do it too. Like
yes,
that's that's the other
yeah,
side of it, is
yeah.
like
And also, yeah, I'm a
self.
coach, but I'm not a nutritionist. And I
Hmm.
know, a lot about sports nutrition, but if we're going to get really into the weeds, I'm a little hesitant to get out of my lane on some of that.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, and in the world of testing too, it's like there's the processing limitations where, like, your coaching client who's doing well on 90, it's possible that she's just an outlier
Hmm.
amongst the averages that came up to that 60 number, where for whatever reason she's able to take in
Yeah.
more and process it thoroughly, versus maybe what the average person should be able to expect to do. But like, I mean, I think there's also, like, if people are interested in like really digging in and getting the lab data for stuff, then like getting a metabolic cart test can be helpful for that too,
Hmm.
where you can get a good idea of like what your body's doing with your fuel sources at the different intensities. And then if you know what intensity you're going to target on race day,
Hmm.
you can at least be kind of in the ballpark of what you would maybe
Yep.
need versus what you see someone else doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For
yeah.
sure.
So yes, and then again, like obviously you have to have access to that. But you could also look at it. I've said this a few times on this podcast in the past, where it's like if you just look at kind of population level data too, it's like most people on a moderate to high carbohydrate diet are going to be about a 50-50 split between carbs and fats at their aerobic threshold.
Right.
So, most people running Western states or any 100 miler for that matter are going to be at or below their aerobic threshold.
Right.
So you can kind of look at workload at that point too, and think of it through the lens of like, well, if I'm covering 5-6 miles per hour, let's say, then, I'm looking at maybe a half that workload coming from carbohydrate at most. So you can start getting an idea of where the ceiling maybe is of what you'd want to even entertain.
Hmm.
Um, and then follow the Pam Smith approach of, if it's bottlenecking, probably stop putting stuff in there.
100%. 100%. I paced a friend last year, and I've paced her before, and she's lost her stomach on two other occasions where I've paced her. And this time when she started getting nauseous, I said, just stop putting any food in.
Yeah.
You can walk on your reserve. And that's what we did. She never threw up, you know, but
Hmm.
it's it's like, yeah, you can throw up and you can reset and then maybe you can go again, but you're going to lose a lot of time if that happens.
Hmm.
Because it could even involve a nap, you know. But if
Yeah.
you can
Well, you could
keep,
get dehydrated by throwing up a ton too.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
you make
yeah,
create another problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we kept moving forward, and she didn't throw up, and she got her finish. Um,
Hmm.
low on calories, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing that I found was I think this might have been last year at Western States actually. I can't remember who did it, but someone took the time to like reach out to everyone in the top 10 and try to get what their fueling strategy
Oh
was.
wow.
And you get a range there to some degree of people who are like super diligent where they had a person just tracking every gram, and then
Hmm.
you'd have people like, I don't know, I was just eating
Yeah, that'd be
or like
me.
we tracked through 70 and then we just gave up.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think they got almost all of the top 10 men to at least give them an estimate of what they were
Hmm.
doing. And then I think I think there was a few less of the women that had the data or responded. I can't remember what exactly the reasoning was, but it was just interesting to look at what they did collect because it was a pretty there was definitely a trend towards higher
Hmm.
where we saw, I think, more people kind of hitting, especially on the men's side, hitting like 100, maybe 110 grams. But then there were some that were a little bit lower too. There was
Hmm.
like, I think there was a couple women that were 60 grams.
Hmm.
There was a couple scenarios where it was like, I was like 100 grams, like clockwork through 70, and then I was down to 60 the rest of the way.
Hmm.
So, to some degree, it's like you get into the world of like, hey, take it in while it lasts, and then, bleed into your reserves a little
Yeah,
bit
right.
once you can't anymore.
Right, right. Yeah.
uh,
That's a good
yeah.
strategy.
So, and I mean, that's the other interesting part about that research too, where to the degree that what like from what I've seen of the more recent stuff is like when you get like some of these Tour de France athletes and cyclists. Oh, and I guess David Roche, if you
Yeah.
want to get into
And David
runners,
Roach.
hitting 150 grams of carbohydrate per hour is like they're not actually processing that in the race itself, but there's maybe some value add there in terms of one, they finish that event or that workout and they've essentially had an extra meal or
Yeah.
two, and maybe in some cases.
Yeah.
So they've sort of like started that process of refueling and catching up a little
Yeah.
quicker. So you think of just compounding that in training, it could be
Hmm.
like extra training capacity, faster recovery, that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then there's just also like we don't necessarily have a total grip on what the full picture of perceived effort reduction is with the carbohydrate ingestion side of things. So,
Hmm.
we like to look at this through the lens of like data of like I can process this or this is what I need, but then there's this whole other kind of almost psychological side of things of like the actual intake of it, what's it doing from our body's ability to say, hey, go hard versus man, you're blowing up, slow down, because that's a voice in your head that you're gonna have to compete with at the later stages of these races
For
too.
sure.
So
Yeah.
I think all of that's pretty fascinating when you get into some of those strategies.
Yeah. It is interesting. Well, then there's also the expense. I mean,
Yeah. Hmm.
all of
Yeah.
that fuel is so expensive. Um, yeah, I don't know. I would like to say I'm gonna, just buy the raw materials and make my own
Right. Yeah.
my
Yeah.
make my own drink because I think it's really quite inexpensive to do that. Um,
Hmm.
but it can be quite limiting to do all these training runs and try to get that many carbs in. You just spent $20 or $30 or
Right.
$40 for your run. This is supposed to be a cheap sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great point too. It's like, yeah, like a run with just minimal fueling is going to be cheaper than one with maximum, although you might eat more afterwards if you're on top of things. But
Yeah, but you can eat real
I wonder
food.
too. True. Yeah. Yeah. I do wonder too about like how as we see people kind of getting more serious about fueling outside of just the race itself, if
Hmm.
we'll see just more people like turning to things that are like cheap versions of the sports product where it's like, oh, just, I just grabbed a bag of jelly beans and went with it
Right,
versus,
right.
because there's, I mean, you do want to be mindful of the different types of carbohydrate to some degree, but
Yeah.
if we're not trying to absolutely maximize versus
Hmm.
just do a good job of practicing, you can go a long way with some of those cheaper inputs.
Yeah, I mean, just a box of fig bars, is a lot cheaper
Yeah,
than
right.
some of those engineered food bars. Um, yeah, at some point, you just need some calories, and if it tastes good, go for it.
Hmm. Yeah. Was there a point when with your Western states, I could even be ultra running experience to some degree where you started seeing people be more attentive to that? Or were there people talking back in '06 at Western states about trying to hit certain amounts of grams and
Oh gosh,
uh
no, I don't think grams of carbohydrate came into the lexicon for quite a while. It was kind of, I feel like there was more emphasis on hydration, and there was sort of prescription, like you want to get in. We did ounces back then,
Yeah.
like 32 ounces per hour, or it would be like,
Yeah.
or two 16-ounce bottles in an hour. Um, and it was calories. Yeah, I mean, really, the grams of carbohydrate, I feel like it's only come in the last 5 years where that's, you look at a package of something, you don't even look at calories. It's like how many grams of carbohydrate are
Carbs.
linked
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, it was calories, and it was, 200 to 300 calories an hour should be what you try to get. Doesn't matter what they are.
Hmm.
And we know that it does matter, but um, yeah, so it was a mind shift for me, and I've only sort of shifted in the last 2 or 3 years, really, I think, for carbs, because I always thought, well, if it's a packet of goo and I do three of them in an hour, then that's going to be good. But I wasn't really
Hmm.
looking at how many carbs. I was just like, okay, this should work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. I remember, I think this was in 2014. I went out to Western States to crew and pace, and Nick Clark was he was like talking to people beforehand because he had been finishing kind of around like third, fourth place for a few years,
Hmm.
and it was just kind of like he wanted that, like, okay, what do I got to do to like jump that and get the win?
Yeah.
So he came in with this strategy where he was like, I can't remember. I want to say he was like, I'm going to take in 60 gels or something like that. And he's like, I'm going to like be squirting them into my water bottle, shaking them up. And I
Yeah.
remember at the time thinking, I don't think I've had 60 gels in my life. and, and and I mean he had a terrible digestive issue that year,
Yes,
but
I remember.
I
I
was part
passed him.
part
He was
okay,
he,
yeah, yeah. So
he was
yeah,
on a
he
cot.
he went
He
the wrong
recovered enough.
direction.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he went the wrong direction. But I was thinking about that, like, because at the time I was like, okay, well, that's just off the table. Like, that's not even an option and you should entertain. But now it's just like you wonder about with when you see some of the fueling strategies people are using, if it was like maybe the strategy was okay if he had known about just gut training and
Hmm.
been practicing. Because I'm guessing Nick wasn't going out there on the long runs on the weekends and hammering like
Yeah. 12
that
gels.
many equivalent of gels per hour as he was on race day. So it may have just been like I mean, it also could just be that him at the individual level wasn't going to be able to tolerate that either. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you think of those stories and you hear about that stuff and you're just like, oh yeah,
Yeah. Well, Magda won Western States drinking Roctane.
that's right. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
basically all Roctane,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
can go a long way on Roctane, and I can actually get quite a bit of carbs in on drinking that, to a point. But then after a while, my stomach will rumble a little bit, and I'm like, okay, probably too much.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Magna was one of the first people I remember that was pretty scientific about it at
Hmm.
Western States specifically, where there was like, I mean, I'm sure there were other people too, but like of someone that was like talking about it and that became kind of a bit of part of the storyline.
Hmm.
Maybe that was because it was basically all rock. It kind of has like a nice little kind of like flair to it where
Yeah.
like it catches your attention. You want to know more because,
Yeah.
most people are going to have a little more variety. And
Right.
then you start digging into the actual approach. You're like, oh, okay, I see what she was thinking there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember that year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you? I'm guessing you said you're pacing this year
I
at
am
Western.
crewing and perhaps pacing. The person I'm crewing is from New Zealand, and he brought his son, and his son wants to crew him or wants to pace him from Forest Hill to the finish. And I'm going to be backup in case that turns out to be too big a task for this
Hmm.
18-year-old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be fun experience either way. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting event from that respect where it's like you have the participants, which are like there's a limit on how many can do it, but then the number of people that show up from a support standpoint, volunteer
Yeah.
standpoint, spectator standpoint, media standpoint, it's like it's
It's
quite a production at
insane.
this point. So
Yeah. It's
yeah.
that part has just exponentially, like the lottery itself.
Hmm.
It's just huge, and it's exciting. It's fun. The thing that I love about this race is that while we have first timers. Almost everybody's a first and only timer now.
Hmm. Yeah.
And the last time I ran it in 2022, um, going up the escarpment, I was near Erica um, Linland. Erica, oh, her married name will come to me in a minute. And Casey Lichtai. We were
Yeah.
close to each other, and Erica says, "Hey, Megan, I really enjoy running Western States with somebody. Do you wanna hang out and run with me?" And I'm like, "Why not? I mean, I've never purposefully done that, but
Hmm.
why not?" And then Casey was like right in front of us, and the three of us were basically within earshot and eyeshot of each other all the way to Forest Hill.
Oh, wow.
And that was really incredible because we were three people, and between the three of us, what we have? We had 15, we had like 23 finishes of the three of us.
Hmm.
Everyone else around us, it was their first time almost.
Yeah.
So we'd say that if you want any advice,
Yeah.
we
You're
have
the problem
experience
solvers.
here. Yeah. But what was super great and what I love is we come into an aid station and the aid station people are the same. Like every year it's the same community all along the way. So while we have basically strangers running the race
Hmm.
itself is still familiar and the people are still that same community. So that part hasn't changed. And I love that because everything else around it has. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, it's such a just such a cool event.
Just a quick reminder, Maui Nui venison is one of my favorite protein sources. The reason, they have balanced an invasive species, the axis deer, that is devastating to the Maui habitat if not kept in check, all while providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat source you will find. Consider letting them know that you heard of them from me by taking a look at their website at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. You can also check out the full description of how I use Maui Nui venison at the end of the episode. Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too because I think like Western states obviously has grown and there's been a lot of change with just the coverage of it and then the big one is just obviously the access to it now is like you got to pay your dues essentially for maybe a decade if you're going to get in, just be consistent with trying and hope that it happens sooner rather than later. Um but in terms of like when I look at the ultra world as a whole, it's like the Western states is sort of saddled with a really interesting kind of need where it needs to hold on to some of the reason why it got popular in the first place,
Hmm.
but then also grow with the sport to the degree
Hmm.
that it stays relevant
Yeah.
within the modern context of it.
Yeah.
And it's like with that sort of approach or need, you almost have to have this thing where you make a small change one year or a change, or maybe it's not small, maybe it's a relatively big change, but you're not like, all right, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. So I just think of like how Craig must be processing these things of like, okay, I'm sure like when he first started RDing, he was probably like, he had a lot of ideas of what he thought would be the vision of what Western states would look like today, but also probably thought like, well, I have to be mindful of which ones I do when and how I do them so we don't make this a whole entirely different event overnight to the degree where it loses its value and to the degree where like if you look back at it probably in 2006 versus today, it might look like a lot more change. And it probably even felt like over those 20 years from then till now, as you kind of got gradually exposed to some of the growth and the change, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just having a conversation with Craig's brother Chris yesterday about this and wondered if Craig, in his wildest dreams, could have imagined what Western States is today from when he started as an RD. And you're right, he's very sensitive and methodical about the meaning of the race and keeping that integrity and keeping the spirit of the race the same. Um, and there's a really good board of directors that care deeply about all of that. And it's not meant to be some big commercial, event. It became one, but that's not what it's about. And I think that, and having Topher now as the new president of the board, and Diana Fitzpatrick have been on that wave. But they're just such fine people and have such a passion for this race. I don't see that most important aspect of the race ever going away.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the biggest pinch point obviously is just the field size stays the same and
Mm-hmm.
the number of interested people grows quite quickly every year, it seems like.
Yeah.
Eventually that'll level off, I imagine, but even if it leveled off today, it would still be like, you know, probably the biggest issue that they have to try to manage with that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. If you were able to be in charge of Western states, is there anything you'd be like, this is what I would try to do to make it easier to get in, or is that an impossible task?
I think it's pretty impossible. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's easier because you still just have a limited number of people that can do it. So,
Yeah,
and there
without being able
are,
to open the field up.
right, yeah. And I don't, yeah, I don't know if I hope that they would or would be able to. If they did, I sure wouldn't want it to see more than 1,000 people, to be a little
Hmm.
more than twice as big as it is. I'm sure it could be handled, but I don't know. It'd be a pretty big ask for what would the impact be on all the resources and
Hmm.
the towns and the aid stations, getting the remote aid stations, getting supplies out. I don't know. I think it's in a sweet spot. I don't think making it bigger isn't going to make it isn't going to make it better.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it could also be that like part of the evolution of Western states is like, this is an event where if you want to partake in it, unless you get really lucky, it's just one where you have to become an ultra runner
Mhm.
versus just be a one-offer or like someone
Yeah.
who's in and out of the sport.
100%. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so it just gets kind of, yeah. Yeah. So I
And
mean, that may just be the identity that it develops if with its current framework.
yeah. Yeah. And it probably will level off at some point. People will just at some, above 10,000 people might just stop like I'm not going to enter that because I'll never get in. And
Yeah.
and that's
Hmm.
fine. And with the growth of our sport, there are so many really good race companies and races around the country, around the world. So I think it's all good. And people
Hmm.
can
There's
come.
plenty
It's
of
still
options.
it's
Yeah.
still you still don't have to pay to come to Western States and watch. I mean, you have to pay to
Hmm.
get here, but
Yeah.
it's free. You can go to Forest Hill for free. You can go to the track for
Hmm.
free. You can go out on different places and watch the excitement. So yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about like what are some interesting things that would be like would probably never happen, but I think would just be like a weird hypothetical to kind of play through would be like if you were able to do like Western states, like have the traditional Western states the way it is, but then do like other runnings of it, whether it be like on a different weekend where you have something unique about it, where it's like, okay, we're going to do Western states without crew and pacers,
Uh-huh.
or like, yeah, or like minimize like the number of aid stations versus what you currently get.
Yeah.
Because I think there's like the ultra running world is kind of, I always wonder about like, we were talking about this, just like the optimization of
Hmm.
things where it almost gets to a point where now you have like a bit of like inclusive, like it becomes a little more like blocked off where like if you want to really optimize at Western states, you're probably bringing two crew, you're probably bringing like maybe multiple people per crew, you're going to want someone who can pace you and maybe not also crew so that they're fresh and ready for
Right.
you. There's all the expenses that go along with that, and then like you were saying, like you want to do it right because it's Western states, you may never do it again, so
Yeah.
you're spending hundreds of dollars on fueling and all that stuff. Where like, is there a way to give people like a traditional Western states experience that also comes with like a little bit less of a like hurdle to get over because you just don't give them those options, where now
Yeah.
all of a sudden like it's not just, oh shoot, I'm doing Western states uncrewed, unpaced, and I'm going to be slower relative to everyone else because of that. No one else in this one is doing that. And I think that'd be kind of fun too, just from like a kind of like how I'm gonna pair myself up to what it was like to run the course when Scott Jerk was doing it,
Yeah.
or when
Yeah. Yeah.
some of the yeah, and just
Yeah.
get a better grasp
Yeah.
of like what it was like to run it maybe back in the day.
Yeah.
I don't know how popular that would be or interesting that would be, and obviously it's like you inherit a whole nother job
It would
by
be, it might be actually impossible. And that's because of the section of trail that goes through the Granite Chief Wilderness.
okay.
You can't have, you can't have an organized event on wilderness above a certain number. And the race already existed when the Granite Chief became
Oh, his grandfathered in.
wilderness.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Hmm.
So to have, I mean, you could go on your own and you could take some friends with you and do it
Yeah.
that way. I've done that, not the whole thing. I just did an over the top with some friends in July, and it was beautiful. It was fun to be up
Hmm.
high in the country. The flowers were different, and we went from the start to Devil's Thumb and got picked up. And um, I think Dan Barger did. He I think he did succeed at an out and back. Like he went from
Okay.
Auburn all the way to Olympic Valley and then back. And when
Wow.
he had support.
Crew out there.
But
Yeah.
yeah, um, I mean, there's things you could come up with on your own because it's a free trail. It's
Hmm.
not it's public land. Um, but yeah, to have it logistically sorted out, but do it with friends or something, I think would be kind of cool.
Hmm.
My dream would be to have, if you could have the permit for 2 days, would be to have the women's race on Saturday and the men's race on Sunday,
Oh, yeah,
and
that would be
have
cool.
them both at capacity. Like have
Hmm.
369 women in the race, and then the next day have 369 men in the race. I don't know how that could happen, but I think that'd be pretty cool.
That would be fun. Yeah,
I
that
mean,
would be fun.
again, you've got aid stations and volunteers, and it'd be kind of a logistical nightmare, but still
Yeah.
kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and if there's an event that could pull it off with like just with like how many people would be interested in like they could essentially double their like any of these aid stations could probably um drum up enough people to come in
Yeah.
and help out because like it's actually hard to get in, I think in some cases, isn't it? There's a lot of demand to want to be a aid station volunteer at Western States.
Yeah, and it's fairly local. And so an aid station captain is usually a captain for years, and it's up to them how many volunteers they need and take.
Hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is an interesting one. The other way I was thinking about would be since given what you mentioned about like yeah this is grandfathering, so it's not like we can just say like okay 3 weeks later we're going to run another one like an unsupported one or something like that.
Yeah.
Would be have it just be almost like what they have with like the fastest known time website where it's just like
Mm.
all right you do your due diligence around like putting up your tracking and
Hmm.
your strategy and take your pictures and have people do like Western States um like just a non-event Western States whenever they want, and they could within reason have like a few of their friends do it with them too, and
Hmm.
then you get on this like website where like okay I did Western States on July
Yeah.
30th 2000 and what
Yeah. Yeah.
and have like kind of a just like a little bit of a separate side community that's like experiencing the trail but
Hmm.
not doing it specifically through the event.
Yeah.
And it just depends on, I guess you really draw out what the drive is in terms of desire to do it at that point, because is it like actually I think there's a huge amount of people who want to experience the event
Hmm.
as the event versus just the trail itself.
Yeah.
So I think you lose all those people from an interest standpoint, but
Yeah.
um who knows, it's fun to
Yeah.
think about either way.
Yeah. I would say that I'm in the I want to experience the trail more than anything. I mean, I love
Okay.
the event. It is fun, but the first time I knew about Western States was watching the video Race for the Soul. And when I saw the terrain, that's when I wanted to do it. It's like I just really want to run on that course. And I also remember um, one day on a training run um, on the descent down to El Dorado, and there's all this manzanita, and it's just so beautiful. And I was running with somebody, and he just yells out "trail porn," and I'm like, "That's exactly right. Western States is just trail porn, and it's just such a happy place to run, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like the event is just a big celebration of all, and you get to share it with people, and you meet people, and you get to tell them more about it that they didn't know already, and so that
hmm
part's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess maybe training camp is like a indication of how people engage with it too, where, like I've gone out to training camp in the past when I'm
Hmm.
not in the race and participated in that because you can go and do that
Yeah.
without being in the race.
Hmm.
I mean, you still have to, get in line and sign up on time and all that stuff, but but that's another option. I always find that to be kind of like it's like Western States has got enough of this aura around it where I think things like if you take any piece of it and add something to that piece, whether it be during the event or outside of the event, there's going to be some of that kind of nostalgia revolving around it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of opportunities to make
Yeah.
something out of it,
Yeah.
whether,
I recommend training camp all the time to anybody who wants to do the race and thinks they'll never get in. And sometimes they don't know that you don't have to be in the race to go to training camp.
mhm,
And yeah, there's fewer aid stations, but the spirit's the same. It's
yeah.
really, really fun. And if you just show up day of, there's usually, I don't know if anyone's ever been turned away. You can
Oh, that's good
register
to
the
know.
morning of, if you make it out to Forest Hill Saturday morning at 6 a.m. There's people that don't show up, and so there's usually,
Okay.
yeah.
Some
I
empty
don't, I
seats.
really don't know. I mean, there could have been people not allowed, but I don't know that that's ever happened.
hmm
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, you mentioned something before when you're talking about the number of 70 and one
Uh-huh.
80-year-old that's in it. Did I see that Jim Howard is one of the 70-year-olds
Mm-hmm.
that's doing it?
Yep. Yep.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
A little bit of history there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I hope he finishes. He DNF'd last year, but he was pretty
Oh,
close.
did he run it last year? I didn't even realize
Yeah,
that.
he
Wow. Okay.
he
So
yeah, he didn't make it to the track in time. So he finished, but he was over that
after 30
time.
hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's in pretty good shape. I don't, yeah, I think he has a good shot at it.
hmm
Yeah.
I think that's just cool that there are people that are still not just like because I mean there's the question of like how long can you do ultras for, but then
Hmm.
there's also like how long do you stay interested in it? And if you're
Hmm.
someone like him, it's like, it's not like he just decided to start doing ultras when he
Yeah.
was in his 60s and now he's in his 70s and he's still got the appetite. It's like, no, the
Yeah.
guy who's been doing it it's such a part of him. He probably
Yeah.
hardly remembers not being an ultra runner.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, is there anything about Western States this year that you're really excited about, or is it just let's go there and see what happens because
Yeah.
it's going to be a
I'm just
surprise
always
either way?
excited, and I think that, that both races are just up in the air, and I love that.
hmm
Either way, I mean, if Jim was there, I'd be excited. Go Jim,
Yeah.
and he's not like, yay, and trying to, just pick a favorite or not pick a favorite, but just the whole thing's just going to be unfolding on both fields.
Yeah.
So, and both fields are so stacked. I just love it. Such good races. Yeah.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting too, because like, yeah, I think like one of I guess the downside of Jim, outside, obviously no one wants anyone to miss their spot at Western States, but not having Jim there is I feel like this is maybe one of the first years where he was on the line since he started winning, where it was like, maybe he could have a great race and not win.
Right.
And that I
Yep.
think
Yep.
would have been a little bit unique.
Yep.
Um, on the women's side, I think it's just interesting that like neither Courtney or Katie are running it this year.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think the women's fields are getting stronger very, very quickly, and it's possible that they could be there and not win, obviously, too. But I think
Yep.
that's maybe a little bit that makes it a little more less determined, or like I think like
Yeah.
if you're just people voting on who's going to
Yeah.
win, if Courtney or Katie are in the field, a lot of people are voting for Courtney or
Yeah.
Katie.
Yeah. Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
yeah, so as you kind of got that on the both men's and women's, where it's like, yeah, it's really wide open.
Yeah.
So it'll
Could be very
be
exciting.
exciting. There'll be
Yeah.
plenty of stories coming out of it, I'm sure,
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Megan, thanks a bunch for coming on and chatting about some of the stuff. I know you've got just such a unique experience with the event itself and in ultra running in general. It was kind of fun to have you on and chat about some of the different stuff that go into running ultra marathons and Western States and all that stuff. I hope you have a great build up to TDS. But before I let you go, if you want to share with the listeners where they can find you, if you got website, social media, or things like that, that they can tune in and see what you're up to on.
I'm occasionally on Instagram at running Megleg. Um, I have a coaching website, zenithcoaches.com, and you can also reach me by email, Coach Meghan Canfield at gmail.com.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, it was a blast to chat with you, and I look forward to bumping into you at a race down the road. I'm sure we'll have one in common at some
Yeah,
point.
super. All right, thanks.
Thanks for sticking around and listening to how I use the show sponsors. Maui Nui Venison is a product I discovered last year. What caught my eye was their quality and business model. They have paired the need to manage an invasive species with providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat you will find. The axis deer arrived in Maui in single digits but grew fast and have damaged the local ecosystem, and if left unchecked are projected to reach up to 200,000 in number in future years. Maui Nui decided to solve this problem and minimize waste. Axis deer meat provides 43% of your daily value of protein in just 107 calories and boasts a 1.5 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is the most balanced ratio of any red meat. This same 107 calories provides 22% of your daily value of vitamins and 37% of your daily value of minerals. They have a wide range of products including ground venison, leg medallions, rib chops, strip loin fillets, and loin chops. They also make a beef stick that includes an option with organ meats, which makes a perfect protein-packed snack that I will usually have in the afternoon before a strength session. I've also been enjoying the ground venison for dinner, usually paired with steamed vegetables or a sweet potato. You can find a bunch of recipes and ways to prepare their products on their website at mauinuivenison.com. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte supplement. Based on my electrolyte loss rate of 614 milligrams per liter, I begin my day with half a packet of one of their hot beverage flavors with my morning coffee. I rotate through all of them, but my favorite at the moment is the chocolate mint. Later in the day, I have been having either a packet of their watermelon flavor or a can of Element Sparkling, which is their carbonated electrolyte drink. I usually have the black cherry lime or watermelon flavor for those. If you are curious about how to dial in your own fluid and electrolyte setup, check out episode 300 of this podcast, where I dive into some of the things you can do at home to gauge how much fluid and electrolytes you may need. A free sample pack with your first purchase can be found at drinklmnt.com/HPO. Delta G ketones is the best researched exogenous ketone supplement on the market. The research on exogenous ketones is constantly evolving. Delta G is responsible for much of it, hosting 50 plus published studies and 20 plus ongoing studies, and have received DARPA grants designed for special forces. Delta G uses ketone esters, which is unmatched in raising blood ketone levels when matched per gram. The best use case, as the evidence currently stands, is as a post-workout supplement for better recovery and or during longer, lower intensity sessions to help with mental focus. For this reason, I will have a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's the little blue bottle, after my biggest workouts for the week and during long run training sessions once I have been out running for about 45 to 60 minutes. Head over to deltagketones.com and enter BITTER20 for 20% off your next purchase. Currents, which is spelled Curranz, is a pre-workout supplement that I started using this year based on the mounting evidence that has started pointing towards them as being a potential endurance workout supplement that can help move the needle on things like recovery, blood flow, fat oxidation rate, reduce muscle damage, etc. They have 40 plus studies on their website if you want to check those out. The way I use this product is when I wake up in the morning, I usually have a cup of coffee and some electrolytes and just start my day getting hydrated. And while I'm doing that, I'll have a couple capsules of Currents along with that. And then I get out for my first workout. If I'm doing something a little bit longer, like a really long ultra-specific long run or an ultramarathon race or something like that, where I'm going to be out there for multiple hours, I'll usually have another capsule or two every 4 hours while out there doing that. So I'm excited to see what this can possibly do for some of the races I got coming up this year. If you want to check them out and some of the research that they have, head over to currentsusa.com. That's curranzusa.com. And don't forget to plug in the promo code BITTER20DEAL which will get you 20% off your first purchase. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.